G'day, mate. 40 here. So, in places like NASCAR and high schools and colleges, there's this F Joe Biden chant breaking out. And so, I wanted to talk to my right wing friends. How do you feel about this? Obviously, this isn't traditional family values. I'm not a big fan of this chant. And I wouldn't want to be in a crowd that was doing this, says a friend. So, I guess I'm opposed. And my friend says I prefer the passive aggressive. Let's go, Brandon. So instead of saying F Joe Biden, there's the passive aggressive. Let's go, Brandon. Now another friend says, how do you feel about a president who is clearly unfit for office? I don't think Joe Biden is clearly unfit for office. I certainly don't think he's any less fit than Donald Trump or Barack Obama. So I think Biden's doing an okay job. And I think he's definitely running the show because his policies and the way he's operating are exactly what you would expect from someone with his 50-year-long track record in national politics. So, yeah, not a big fan of F. Joe Biden as a chant. I would prefer a Republican. I would prefer Donald Trump in office, but I think Biden's doing okay. And it seems to me that Biden comes across, and the Biden administration comes across as more competent with regard to COVID. I'm not saying that they are. I don't have like public health knowledge sufficient to make that claim. But the Trump administration definitely came across as incompetent with regard to COVID. And the Biden administration, I think, comes across as competent. Now, there's no necessary connection between how you come across and the facts on the ground. So I don't think that the Trump administration did a particularly horrible job. It's not clear that any industrialized non-Asian nation did particularly well with regard to COVID. So there's so much that we don't know. So I don't think the United States was particularly incompetent under Trump, but it certainly did come across that way, certainly as it was filtered through in the media. I think this played a big role in Trump losing a small swing in the suburbs. So there was a 2% swing against Trump in the suburbs. And I think probably much of that was a reaction to the administration seeming chaos with regard to COVID. Now, did France or Germany or Spain or the United Kingdom or Sweden or Norway, did any of these countries do substantially better with regard to COVID? No, not really. So another friend says, when you shout, I want a nice white country into the abyss, F Joe Biden is shouted back at you. And then a friend said, I listened to a lot of Richard Spencer last night. His reason for supporting Joe Biden, the Democrats, seems to be they are winning. Well, I think Richard would say that the Democrats at this point are better for his concerns, that they're more competent. And another friend says, I was genuinely surprised when Richard was questioned about leading his movement off a cliff at Charlottesville. He responded that movements have failures, and he used Uncle A's failed beer hall push in 1925 that got Uncle A and a bunch of others in jail. I mean, what a horrible comparison. Like, how delusional. I mean, Spencer is like, yeah, I'm a Nazi. I mean, how insane is that comparison to justify your bad decisions? So I think humiliation's been good for Spencer, but he's still clearly substantially disengaged from reality. And you'll know that when Spencer's made a change in a pro-social direction, when he starts taking responsibility for his own bad decisions. Now, as long as people like Spencer or anyone you meet regards their problems as primarily the fault of other people, then you're dealing with a loser and someone who embraces a victimhood mentality. Someone who's able to say, hey, I play a substantial role in my own troubles, then that's someone, I think, who's much more in touch with reality. And my friends say that there's really no answer to Spencer's shift from Charlottesville and the alt-right to Joe Biden backer other than personal aggrandizement, just showing how special I am. And my friend says, I've noticed this from all the great talents, Michael Savage, Luke Ford, Richard Spencer, when leading an audience that has many potential competitors from the same right-wing camp, It's a good strategy to quickly do a series of off-speed pitches to reassert that you have a distinct brand and that you become something special. Right? You avoid becoming run of the mill. And my friend says, I would definitely be doing something similar if I had a mass audience with rivals and worrying we were becoming too similar. So this is another example of why pundits are useless. To what extent are your present perceptions of Biden's competence vis-a-vis Trump shaped by radically different media coverage each received? Yeah, I can't disentangle it from that. So I think the media portrayed Trump as particularly incompetent with regard to COVID. I think they were harsher on him than reality would warrant, given the troubles that other industrialized Western nations have had conducting COVID. And the media, of course, vastly prefers Joe Biden. And yeah, Spencer took a lot of abuse from his own team. At a certain point, he might have just said F you. Michael Savage used to rail against moving the embassy to Jerusalem, that it was a needless provocation. But for years previous to that, he trashed those who worried about the sentiments of the Arab street. So Savage was just reasserting an idiosyncratic identity apart from the Rush Limbaugh cartel. So again, pundits are useless, and to the extent that I'm a pundit, I'm equally useless. I remember when Michael Savage was mad at Ann Coulter after she said, "How many effing Jews are there in America?" I remember when Michael Savage used to attack Patrick Buchanan, saying he was trying on all these weird Nazi uniforms in private, and then Michael Savage did a 180-degree and had him on for Buchanan's latest book. So Michael Savage has always had a conflict with his inner Jew. Now, Victor Davis Hanson, he has parted ways from National Review. So how do you feel about that? So he says there were certain issues that would pop up occasionally, and I could predict what the National Review answer would be, the Covington kids. So Victor Davis Hanson's an interesting bloke who stands betwixt several worlds. So on the one hand, he has done some serious scholarship. On the other hand, he has churned out a ton of non-serious scholarship, so much so that he's probably, crossed the line into hack. Oh, I mean, he crossed that line probably 20 years ago, partisan hack. But at one point, he did do some serious scholarship, say 30 years ago. Then over the past 20, 25 years, he's just become another partisan hack. So he's crossed the line. And once you cross that line to just becoming another partisan hack, I don't think you can ever return to your identity as a serious scholar. Now, so on the one hand, he's got some serious scholarly credentials. On the other hand, he's a partisan hack. On another hand, he's another Republican conservative. On another hand, he's outside basic Republican conservatism. He has a substantial bit of the American nationalist in him. So he stands between normie Republican conservatism and nationalism. So he's a little more edgy than National Review. So he's a little bit like Tucker Carlson. And so he went on Tucker Carlson's show, and Victor says he parted way with National Review because they were just too eager to condemn people like the Covington kids or Donald Trump for the Access Hollywood tape, or National Review did a whole cover story against Donald Trump in something like January 2016. And he thought that National Review was too hard on the January 6th rioters on Capitol Hill. And looking at outside the Beltway, they say this conversation shows that tone policing is not just confined to the left. Of course, every group has tone policing. Victor David Hanson has always been a right-winger. He's usually been fairly normie conservative. He's also defended what outside the Beltway calls some of the right's outrageous conspiracy theories. I'm not sure which ones they're talking about in particular. And so this perspective says Victor is upset that what's left of what Bill Buckley built is still clinging to some semblance of rational argument and principles. So it's hilarious that there was a reporter at Talladega thinking that the crowd chanting F Joe Biden was cheering Let's Go Brandon in honor of Brandon Brown's victory. So apparently F Joe Biden's become a regular thing at football games in the South. So yeah, we've become politically polarized, and NASCAR and SEC fans are all riled up. They think Trump got a real deal. So right now, Trump is looking good for 2024. And there was an article in the Washington Post about that. So Democrats are concerned about Republicans winning 3 key governor's races. So Greg Sargent, who's a sometimes insightful left-winger, who writes a column for the Washington Post, he says the Trump threat may soon get worse. Here's the under-the-radar reason for it. And Democrats are worried about 3 gubernatorial races in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. So in all 3 states, there are GOP-controlled legislatures. And if any of the 3 Democratic governors are replaced with a Republican, it will mean unified GOP control, which will, from a Democratic perspective or a media perspective, means will ramp up voter suppression and other anti-majoritarian tactics. I don't think that Republicans are really ramping up voter suppression. There may be a very mild, verging on insignificant amount of voter suppression. But from a left-wing or a mainstream media perspective, this looks like election subversion. I think that's overstating it. But I'm kind of in between. I haven't fully worked things out here. Very interesting article in the New York Times, an op-ed column. Trump's true believers have their reasons. So I love Thomas B. Edsall. He always publishes an informed column once a week on Wednesdays. So who believes the claim that Donald Trump won in 2020 and the election was stolen from him? So apparently 35% of Americans believe that Biden's victory was illegitimate. 6% say they are not sure. So those who believe that Biden's victory was illegitimate are disproportionately white, Republican, older, less educated, more conservative, more religious, more Protestant, and more likely to describe themselves as born again. So people who believe in replacement theory, that immigrants are invading our country, replacing our cultural and ethnic background, 60% of Republicans agree, 55% of conservatives. So I don't think replacing our cultural and ethnic background is a very strong argument. You could argue it's diminishing its influence. So apparently 70% of Republicans believe the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. But this is easy to say you believe that, but very few are actually doing anything about it. Because if they really believe that seriously, then they would try to document their case. And so far, attempts to document this case have been absolutely pathetic. So I think this is more an expression of anger rather than some deeply thought through perspective. White Republicans with college degrees, 51% believe the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. And this level of belief is remaining consistently strong. Over 60% among Republicans of all ages living in rural, suburban, and urban areas. So what's going on? So from the left-wing academic perspectives, this is because of a growing preference for right-wing authoritarianism by Republicans. So they're turning to aggression to change our political structure to maintain their group-based hierarchies. And I think that's accurate. Another way of phrasing this is that Christianity in the South is becoming more muscular. So what explains the appeal of authoritarian values? Well, let's be honest here. Democracy brought us gay marriage. And so from any kind of traditional perspective, gay marriage is such an abomination. From a traditional perspective, a traditional religious perspective, a traditional Christian perspective, a traditional Jewish perspective, gay marriage is an abomination that blows the mind and discredits any moral standing for democracy. So from a traditional Jewish perspective, or any kind of traditional perspective, you could argue that Putin's regime is far more moral than what's going on in the Western world when the Western world embraces gay marriage. So I think people see things like gay marriage and the growing transsexual movement and Black Lives Matter, and they think, look, the system has failed us, Constitution no longer protects us, democracy doesn't work for us, we need more authority. And remember, even within every working democracy are substantial elements of dictatorship. There's never been a working democracy that does not have substantial elements of dictatorship. So some people simply want a little bit more top-down policy. People want a little bit more authority. So what explains the appeal of authoritarian values? Well, I would say most of the appeal comes from people who are disgusted by the results of democracy. They see their country being polluted. So what problems are solved for people who embrace authoritarian values? So apparently authoritarian messages influence people on two levels. It makes them feel happier, and it enhances their meaning in life. Okay, so it gives people, embracing a more authoritarian approach apparently gives people more happiness, more significance, and more meaning. All right, those are pretty substantial contributions. So embracing a right-wing authoritarian response gives you a feeling of significance, that your life and contributions matter. You have purpose. Your life is driven by the pursuit of valued goals. Your life has coherence. Your goals are comprehensible. And you believe that the world and life make sense. You have something to work towards. So you might think authoritarianism, where people sacrifice their personal freedom to a strong leader, would diminish meaning in life, because you think that you feel less personal significance. But when you embrace an authoritarian solution, I think whether it's right-wing or left-wing, it probably gives you more meaning in life. You have more of a sense that your life matters. So saying we need, a strong authority to take charge, and then as a supporter of this, you get a sense of symbolic or vicarious significance through the strong leader. So I like that. I think that's true. Embracing authoritarian solutions does help people get a sense of happiness and a sense that their lives matter, and adds coherence to the universe and lets them feel significance, vicarious and otherwise. People want a life that works. People want a life that matters. And people need to make sense of the world. Right? People are not down in general living with not knowing. People want coherence in the universe, and coherence largely exists in the artificial structures that we impose from our thinking. Right? The outside world is so confusing that the only major coherence we get is from structures from our minds that we then impose upon reality. So I think a lot of this is when people feel insignificant, they seek out groups and policies and leaders that will empower them with a feeling of significance. So I think you can understand much of what people do from a drive for feeling significant. We all want to feel important, we all want to matter, and we all want to make sense out of reality, and we all want our values to triumph. So endorsing authoritarianism creates high meaning in life. Interesting. Luke, it seems to me that all these academic deconstructions on right-wing motivations are all just dressing up damning with faint praise. Well, it's either accurate or it's not. And so I believe that our politics primarily, or at least partly, comes out of our biology, and you can get a gauge of someone's political instincts by the intensity, for example, of their disgust reflex. So I think people want to feel significant. That's absolutely true. And when people embrace the Trump phenomena, I think it allowed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who otherwise did not feel particularly significant, who felt that the country had left them behind, to find meaning and purpose and significance. How does believing in radical egalitarianism bring us coherence? How does it make us feel better? Good questions, but I am not primarily a scholar of the left. I am primarily someone who's interested in right-wing thought, and that means I'm interested at times in left-wing critiques of right-wing thought, and I'm interested in the real thing, the right-wing thought itself. So I'm not particularly interested in the left. Yeah, did democracy bring same-sex marriage, or did critocracy, meaning judge-made law? Because same-sex marriage lost on the California referendum. So gay marriage was a top-down policy, not a populist democratic policy, but it has won popular support. And in many countries, it has won overwhelming popular support. Close to about 2/3 of Australians voted for same-sex marriage. And so it seems, according to polls and surveys in almost all Western industrialized countries, a strong majority of the country believes in same-sex marriage. Now, this movement was driven from the top, driven down into society, but it's won right now. Overwhelming majorities in all industrialized nations of which I'm aware strongly support same-sex marriage, which is just completely unfathomable from a perspective from 30 years ago. So yeah, social norms have changed, and it's left people with a traditional perspective, their minds spinning, like, what the hell is going on here? Let's go, Brandon. Let's go, Brandon.